Hey guys, Professor Bill of Comic Book University, and in this week's Spotlight on Story, we're going to be talking about a personal favorite of mine, the Shadow War of Hawkman. Okay, I'm going to get into why this was such an important comic book to me after we're finished talking about issue 1 of 4. We're going to talk about really quickly all the people who worked on this comic book, and then at the very end we're going to be talking about a couple other things related to the comic book, where it was supposed to go. Alright, so basically, the people responsible for this comic book, Shadow War of Hawkman. This book was written by Tony Isabella, pencils, Richard Howell, inkers, Alfredo Alcala, on colors, Michelle Wolfman, letters, Mitt Snappin, editing, done by Alan Gold. The executive editor was Dick Giordano, who did the cover art along with Richard Howell, who did the pencils for the book. This book came out in May of 1985. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to start off with this guy. Dark and Stormy Night. Yeah, all the good books, right? They start off with On a Dark and Stormy Night. Mousy Mason is this guy, and Hawkman has had some interactions with him in the past. He's just some guy. He's a very low-rent burglar. You know what I'm saying? Like a cat burglar type. He's actually got a cat named Wolfie. Cute little thing. It's a cute little kitty cat. And this knucklehead comes home and he's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to try and make some money, you know, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, these shadow men kind of show up out of nowhere. Now, yeah, to me, I'm thinking, holy crap, the Shadow Thief. Somebody stole the technology from the Shadow Thief and all that crazy stuff, right? No, not quite. Not quite. There's a whole bunch of these people showing up, and they kind of look like what would eventually look like, you know, much later on, years later, what would appear to be like a Jamie Madrox type character. That's the way these characters look. But yeah, these guys, I believe, came first. I could be wrong. Either way, they're freaky looking. Okay, they look like a bunch of Vulcans, but without the pointy ears, and they're all dressed the same. Now, we find out a bit later who these guys are, but for now, it's a mystery. I'm going to let that mystery kind of sit for a little while because it's actually crucial to my understanding of the book. They start talking about, yeah, listen, man, we need you to go into the private home of Hawkman and Hawkwoman. That's Qatar Hall and Shiara Hall. And so this is the second version, the switched version. This is not the Earth version. This is the Thanagarian version of Hawkman and Hawkwoman. So Mousy is like, you know, I don't know if I really want to do this. And they're just like, oh, okay, no problem. So they lift up their hands and they fire these palm beams that just, boom, eradicate pretty much the house. They just start like doing disintegration rays all over the place. And there's this white mark where the item itself used to be, and then around it there's these terrible burn marks. So you can see these things were clearly disintegrated, gone, done, they're gone, they're history. These are just items. And the threat that was more than just implied was that you're next. Now it's interesting because this reading this in a fresh look years later, the palm beams, they kind of looked like the design that Brainiac has, you know, very similar to that. So I was a little confused there. All right, but like I said, this is a really good book. Okay, Hawkman and Hawkwoman are out beating up some bad guys, some thugs, and all of a sudden their detective friend shows up. It's like, oh hey, good job, good job. Remember, in the DC universe, very unlike the Marvel universe, everybody likes the heroes. All right, it's not just Captain America's cool, everybody else is evil. You know what I'm saying? You got Spider-Man, you got mutants, you got blah, 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 blah. No, here, even Hawkman, and mind you, Hawkman is in Midway City at this point. This is before he moves over to Saint Roch, Louisiana. So, yeah, Midway City at this point. So they fly off, and they're basically just having conversations. Now, Hawkman is, I've said this multiple times, he is one of the most confusing characters there exists in the DC universe, probably in all of comic books. I would put the origin of Hawkman, the multiple versions of Hawkman and Hawkwoman, against any other character you've got. All right, and I will see you with another convoluted storyline. It is what it is. The cool part is trying to make sense out of it all. That, for me, that's the puzzle that I enjoy. But basically, Qatar Hall is this guy who, in this version, his father invented the anti-gravitational wings. And he eventually grew up to become a cop in on Thanagar, and then he was assigned Shiara to be his partner. He didn't like it, but just a couple weeks later, he winds up loving her so much that they get married. So much later on, they take what's called the Absorbiscon. Now, this is a very important item all throughout DC Universe, and it was created on Thanagar. The Absorbiscon is basically a device that, amongst many other things it can do, it can read the minds of non-Thanagarians. All right? It was thought to be inhumane to use it against Thanagarians. But Thanagarians are like, F everybody else, man. We got to know what these crazy creatures are thinking. So Hawkman and Hawkwoman used it to learn the languages of the places that they went to. So that's one thing there. Okay, so these guys leave. There's a brief history going on between what happened when they came to Earth, what happened back on Thanagar. The idea that there was this disease that took over on Thanagar, the equalizing plague. This thing came and wiped over all of Thanagar, and it took away not the free will of the Thanagarians. It wasn't like the anti-life equation. Rather, it took away individual identity. So the whole equality of outcome thing that's discussed, this is the very epitome of that. This is nobody's better than anybody else at anything on Thanagar. So for the most part, they've all practically lost the will to live, to move on, you know? Some Thanagarians used to be amazing ballerinas, and now, they're no better or worse than anybody else. Nobody shines. So that's a very interesting background to me. And then, and that's actually going to have some bearing on what happens later on. So we're going to come across a couple other characters here. Case in point, we're going to come across this guy, Joe. Joe is basically this dude. He's the guy who's Joe Tracy. He's the guy who's in charge of the press for the museum that Carter and Shiara Hall are responsible for. They're actually Carter and Shiara Hall. That's their fake identities. Yeah, like I said, it's confusing. Not the original Hawkman and Hawkwoman. Here, we're also introduced to Mavis Trent. Now, she's actually a character who's been in existence for a while. I've gone back and read other things later about her, and wow, actually very interesting stuff. But this was my first experience with Mavis Trent, with a whole lot of things. I'm going to get to that once I'm finished with this first comic book, as I was saying. Basically, Mavis Trent, she is one of the main artists whose work is always on display at the Midway Museum. Carter and, Qatar and Shiara, their powers are such that they can talk to birds and they can they can hear and see better than most people. It's assumed that they've also got a better scent. That's not really on display here a lot, but it does exist. Technically, their senses are enhanced. Okay, so hearing and sight. So Mavis has this mad, crazy, infatuated crush on Carter. And Carter himself is actually married to Shiara. So, yeah, it's kind of a weird situation, but people are attracted to Shiara, people are attracted to Carter. They're both very good-looking people. They're essentially the perfect humans, would you say? But they're Thanagarians. You know what I'm saying? They'd be the essence of the perfect humans. All right, for all intents and purposes. And of course, the nth metal that is ingrained in their harnesses. And here it's only their harnesses. It doesn't say, Jeff Johns would later on come along and say, oh no, it's in their boots also. Okay, well, for right now, it's just in their harnesses, okay, and their belt packs. So the harnesses for the wings, and they have cybernetic control in the helmets for the wings. Here. Later on, that would change. So, they hear what's going on, what Mavis is madly in love with, and it's like they know all this crazy stuff, and they put up with her because she's mostly harmless. Shiara knows that Carter's not going to cheat on her. Look, Hawkman and Hawkwoman have got this eternal bond of love that has existed since the very beginning of the introduction of these characters until today, all right, and whatever today is. They have always been in love. when people want to talk about marriages and loves in the comic books and things like that, a lot of people will turn to people like, like Spider-Man and MJ and Lois Lane and Clark Kent. Yeah. I'd say the closest you're going to get, saying, to this love would be like Mira and Aquaman. But for the most part, even that relationship cannot hold a candle to Hawkman and Hawkwoman, whatever their incarnations, if it's actually Hawkman and the real Hawkwoman. Just these two, they're inseparable. They're absolutely inseparable. Their fighting is cute fighting for the most part. They are the ideal partners. They're the ideal marriage, all right? The perfect romance. And that's something that's also crucial to their stories. Now, while these two are changing from their Hawk clothes, they got business they got to take care of. But all of a sudden, their little Maltese Falcon statue starts blaring like, "Whoa, that means our private home. There's an invasion there." So Shara's like, "Listen, you go change back over into Hawkman. Go and check out who's messing with our house. All right, somebody's got to go out there and handle Mavis because we've been putting her off for a while now. So go ahead and do your thing." He's like, "All right, whatever, babe." So he leaves, and when he goes back, he sees that Mousy is in there, and he's like, "Dude, you've got to help me." Now, Hawkman isn't stupid. He listens to the birds. He's like, "Birds, what's going on?" And the birds are like all over the place in their wheat form. So that's how they talk, wheat, and that's how he talks to them. And they're not making any sense to Hawkman. So he's like, "All right, well, I got to go and try and figure out what's going on." So he goes in and he hears that there's only one person in there. He realizes it's only Mousy. And when he gets there, he realizes that Mousy is in terror, but not of Hawkman. All right, he knows Hawkman. Hawkman's going to what? Hit him in the gut once, saying, and bring him to jail? He's not worried about that. He's worried about what's about to happen next. All of a sudden, these shadow beings, these shadow thief-like beings, just come out of nowhere and they attack Hawkman. Now, Hawkman, for the most part, doesn't have much of anything to worry about, all right? These guys, he doesn't even know that they're trying to be non-lethal, all right? He thinks that this is real talk right here. So he's just beating the living crap out of these guys, all right? He's taking these guys out. But Mousy doesn't know this either. So he goes and grabs a broken table leg, goes up and smacks one in the back of the head. Yeah, this is like the coolest act that Mousy has ever done. All right, you could kind of consider Mousy like a Turk Barrett kind of character from the Daredevil comics, but for the most part, he is his own person. Mousy winds up getting killed. These guys turn around like, "Oh, you want to turn on us? Really cute." Blah, blah, blah. And they just blast him, and he disintegrates. Big white stain on the wall with the white mark on the wall with the burn marks all around him. Looks like if Bugs Bunny or Daffy Duck ran through a wall, except this is actually deadly. So Hawkman's infuriated. He goes charging right after him. "How dare you!" They go and drop this box that attacks his oversensitive hearing. He smashes the darn thing in a matter of seconds, but that's all that it took. They were trying to get the heck out of Dodge. They knew they didn't want anything else to do with Hawkman. And that couple of seconds to beat him down was not worth it. So they took that couple of seconds to hightail it out of there. Hawkman's a tough cookie. Make no mistake. So Hawkman's like, "Dude, they were after my my anti-gravity harness and the belt, the nth metal stuff, the anti-gravity belt. Wait a second. The only person who has one of those, Shiara." So he flies back to the museum as quickly as he can. And the worst sight you could possibly imagine is there to greet him. A whole bunch of police. So they're like, "Dude, please don't go in there. Please don't go in there. Please don't go in there." And he's just pushing past them. And I can't describe what you see when he goes, barging in there. I could never give it the proper words. Rather, Tony Isabella's words perfectly describe how incredibly freaky what we see happens. This was about as messed up gets, my peeps. All right. For me as a kid, like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Did this really just happen? So this is the end of issue number 1. Yeah, that's right. They end on this cliffhanger. All right. So now a quick little bit of history of this comic book. before I get into the rest of this story, because it's important to understand my understanding, my take on this comic book. I've read lots of comic books throughout my life, and I found this comic book, I think I was 7. Again, this was 1985. No, I would have had to been 10. So, yeah, it's weird. But anyway, so I remember walking into the drugstore with my folks, all right? And I walked into this drugstore, and I'm just like, me, a little kid, I'm like, if drugs are illegal, doesn't this big sign that says drugs on the front, shouldn't the cops just come swarming here? Like, that's my understanding of the world, all right? So I see the comic book rack, and I go up to the comic book rack, and my parents have never bought me a comic book before, all right? They've never bought me a comic book before, even though my father was kind of interested in comic books. My mom could give two squirts about comic books. Every so often, neighbors would bring by who were in charge of bookstores and, those kinds of things, drugstores, whatever. I don't remember those neighbors. But they would bring me over a whole bunch of comic books with the covers torn off. Now, yes, this is highly illegal. It is what it is. But the way that this is stemming back from the Depression era, in order to get people to buy books and magazines, they would give this thing where it's like, listen, you return the book to us if you can't sell it after a period of time, and then bang, we'll refund you cover price for the comic book. So they would send back these books and these comic books, and it would wind up costing a lot in shipping because these people, the individual stores, didn't want to pay for the shipping. So the publishers, the distributors, would pay for that. So they're like, listen, in order to save some prices on this stuff, could you just take off the front cover of the book or the magazine that you're talking about? And comic books were classified as magazines back then. So they would rip off the cover of the magazine, and then they were expected to throw out the comic book. Well, almost nobody threw out the comic books. So I would be gifted a big fat stack of comic books like every month. And I would read these comic books. And I never knew what the front cover of the comic books looked like. I was too unsophisticated at 10 years old to... Or actually, this is stemming back from when I was 7 years old. So I had like 3-4 years of this. I didn't understand how to look inside the, you open the front cover and look at the first page, all at the bottom, they'd have all the information there that you need to figure out the comic book and to find the cover itself. So there's a whole bunch of comic book stories, everything that I read that I have no idea, what the cover looks like. So I have no idea which comic book issue it was. I simply remember the stories. But this, Shadow War of Hawkman, I remember walking into that store. And just to give you an idea, I saw Secret Wars. I can't remember which issue it was. I can't remember if it was issue number 1 or issue number 8, which would have been the black Spider-Man suit, the black suit Spider-Man. Either way, I walked in the store and I remember seeing Secret Wars and I was thinking to myself, this is probably the coolest thing ever. All right, bang, wow, look at this. But at the same time, I saw Hawkman, Shadow War of Hawkman, issue number 1, this comic book that I just read to you guys. And I just remember being captivated. This comic book was, the cover at least, was majestic. I wasn't allowed to open up the comic book because I'm a freaking kid. And drugstores like, buy it or put it down. Yeah, that's a really great way to sell things. So now they put out previews of the comic book. So obviously the buy it or put it down thing doesn't apply anymore. I remember seeing this comic book cover and I was enthralled. I'd never read Hawkman before. And I've seen Hawkman a couple of times on like Challenge of the Super Friends and things like that, on television. But this was sublime. I looked at Hawkman and just like bare-chested, harness across his chest, muscles like you would not believe. Around that time, I started getting into Arnold Schwarzenegger. And it's funny, I would consider bodybuilding and things like that because that's what I thought that, the perfect human being was supposed to look like, right? As I started exercising more and more, I also wound up getting into I was already into the martial arts at the time. And I started getting even heavier into the martial arts, started getting good at the martial arts. And I realized that the big body shape the big heavy weights lifting isn't conducive to martial arts training. So I would switch and eventually I would get a track and field type body type instead. But I saw Hawkman, I'm like, that looks like Arnold Schwarzenegger with wings and a helmet. And I thought, this is the most amazing thing ever. And like the wings just spread across the page and this big, flail that he's got. And this gorgeous woman with wings also flying next to him. And I thought, this is Amazing. Plus, later on, to find out that her name is Hawkwoman. Well, everybody else is called Girl. You know what I'm saying? You got an Invisible Girl. You got all these different girls out there. Hawkwoman was always a woman. And that alone, that right there, amazing. Amazing. Just all these different, like, it just, why is it man and girl? Like, it never made sense to me. So everything about this comic book, the cover, everything, it was just amazing to me. And I went and I asked my father, could I have this comic book? And he said, you have money. And I forgot, yeah, I've been doing chores and stuff like that, and I started earning my own money. So I bought this comic book. This was the first comic book I ever had with a cover, the first comic book I ever purchased with my own money. And I was only 10, so I didn't understand anything that was happening in this comic book, except this dude was flying and beating people up with heavy weapons. That was awesome. And apparently Hawkwoman got killed in this. So I was not sophisticated enough to understand the concept of come back next month and find this issue, and maybe it was delayed. I don't know any of the details of that. I don't know. What I do know is I saw this comic book. I bought this comic book with my own money. I read the heck out of this comic book multiple times, trying to understand it as best I could. Didn't want to actually ask anybody about it. And then I went years before I got to read issue number 2, 3, and 4. So this is a milestone for Professor Bill. This is an important comic book for Professor Bill. Moving on with the rest of the story. In issue 2, which I would find years later after rereading issue 1 again, because I needed to, there's this character called Icarus. He is some character. He's got some kind of mutant ability. It seems there's no mutants in per se in the DC universe, unless you're talking about the Batman ones by Frank Miller. But he's just this metahuman who has the ability to take on certain powers, and one of the things that he does is he grows wings, and he's a farm boy in Kansas. I know, interesting story, right? And these people, these shadow creatures wearing different costumes now, come along and they evaporate, that they disintegrate this guy. Yeah, they disintegrate Icarus. Really messed up, dude. Really messed up. Because they look at it as, well, he's going to be a bigger superhero. We might as well get rid of him now so we can take out all these superheroes. Very quickly, you come to find out, like Hawkman, mind you, this entire time is mourning, and you get a whole bunch about Hawkman and Hawkwoman's history. So he's mourning the heck out of her right now, and it's crazy. Like, it's really sad. And Mavis Trent comes running up to him at one point, oh my God, Hawkman, I need to talk to you in private right now. And he's infuriated right now. He's like, okay, I know you're harmless, but my wife was just he can't say this, but he's just whatever. He's just like, dude, my wife was just, I have no interest in ever talking to you, ever. Get away from me. And he just storms away, and he's talking to the police chief in private, and yeah. Oh, he also reveals the identity, his own identity to the police chief as well. So the police chief's just like, that makes sense. He's not like super shocked or anything. He's like, yeah, it makes sense. I had my suspicions. So, anyway, wow, man. So you come to find out that these bad guys, this is big. These guys are actually Thanagarians. Let that sit in for a second. This is his own people who have come to invade the planet Earth. And you're thinking, where'd they get the ambition to do this? Well, they have a new leader. And we don't find out who this new leader is. All right? We don't find out until no, it's not in this miniseries. All right, not in the Hawkman special. You come to find out much later on what's going on here. This is a shadow war. This is a war that's happening in the dark, in the secrets, the secret recesses of Hawkman's life. And he's all alone right now because his mate, his partner, she's dead. Like, this is messed up. So these guys have come, the Thanagarians have come because they've got a new leader who's given them great ambitions. And even though it's some evil stuff, they were so desirous of someone who could give them purpose in life that they said, you know what? I'll take it. You're a bad guy? Whatever. I'll take it. Bring us to greatness. Give us a chance to actually mean something again. Because Thanagarians used to be amazing, and now they're nothing. They're just people existing until they don't exist anymore, because who cares? So these guys have come down to do this stuff. Now, the thing is, they've also got an Absorbiscon. Now, it's not as sophisticated as their Absorbiscon. And the main reason why they're down there, well, for multiple reasons. They've decided to take over Earth. That's important to them. And in order to do that, they're going to try and systematically destroy all of the superheroes because they don't want that much resistance. The thing they have to do with Hawkman themselves that was supposed to be just go in, get out. All right, get in and get out. They wanted the anti-gravity, at least one of the anti-gravity belts, so they could replicate the technology because they lost the technology. They lost all of that stuff. So, a lot of their technology, which Hawkman is the only person who has all this technology, including the anti-grav belts. So you get there and it's like, oh man, if we can get these things and all this technology, it'll help us to take over the Earth. We can start killing all of these heroes in private, and we can then take over the Earth and take over the entire galaxy. We take over everyone and everything, and the Thanagarians would eventually become like the most warlike race out there. So Hawkman, and again, they've got this Absorbiscon. So why is this a Shadow War? One, they're operating in secret. They can't just come out and start blasting people. They don't have that kind of power. Two, why doesn't Hawkman go and grab? Most of the time, you'll see like, oh yeah, the hero, he's got this storyline. I got to go beat up the bad guys. Can't tell you why I'm not involving anybody else in it. No, Isabella took care of that here. He's like, they've got an Absorbiscon. So with this Absorbiscon, they can read anybody's mind except for Hawkman's and each other's. That's sick, which means Superman, most powerful guy out there, learns all this information. Uh-oh, we know everything that he's thinking. We know everything that he knows. Yeah, the Absorbiscon can even get through his Thorax Vo. It's specifically stated in here that they can even read his mind. Now imagine they read Batman's mind. Right now they read Batman's mind. Wow, this is really bad. But if they know Hawkman's plans, the thing that he's trying to do to stop them, all of a sudden, this becomes a really big issue. Uh-oh. Now we know all the plans. We know everything that you guys are planning on doing to stop us. We can make a countermeasure. We know where you're going to be. We know where you're not going to be. That is probably the most, we're talking about telepathy in the most useful way imaginable. You know what I'm saying? This makes you understand that a telepath is probably the most dangerous foe you could ever have. Even if he's a regular human somehow. God forbid if they've got these Brainiac-style looking, bzz, bzz, laser beams, disintegrators that'll, evaporate you. So, Hawkman has most of his stuff up in his ship, which is in orbit around the Earth. Now, he's got a dimensional door that allows him to go between the ship and his museum, secret space in his museum that he's allowed to, or that he's able to do that. So he goes up to a ship, gets a whole bunch of things, comes back, and he doesn't have time. He doesn't want to take the time to send this stuff back. He doesn't want to take the time to go and bring that stuff back. So instead, he just allows the stuff to be destroyed. He actually destroys himself. He disintegrates it. Really messed up. But like this, was it necessary? No. But at the same time, he knows he can't leave it on Earth because then these guys could show up and they could take his stuff. But they don't have access to a ship right now. He doesn't think, at least, that they've got access to a ship. So he takes a bunch of things. One of the things he takes is probably one of the coolest things ever. He takes Acestus in a sense. Acestus is really a device, like a gauntlet that you put over top of your hand. They would have them in the Roman gladiator days, all right? You'd have like a spike on it, or it'd just be a bunch of spikes on the glove, whatever. So the typical weapons of a gladiator would be like a short sword, or a gladius, they'd be called, a net, a trident, or a cestus. Those would be some of the typical weapons that you would see them using that were very exotic, all right? Here, he uses cestus in a slightly different way. It's just a very long leather strap that he wraps all the way around his arm, like his fists, his arms, and all the way, his wrist, his wrist itself, and all the way down around his forearm. Just a big, long strap of leather on both hands, and it looks sick. You know how it looks even cooler? It's dotted. He's got spikes on the knuckles. Oh my God, that's crazy. Later on, it's also drawn as just rounded off, okay? So it just gives better punching power, but at first, there's spikes, and oh my God, it's sick. It's some of the coolest things ever. I'm like, oh my God, Hawkman he's not playing around. I love that about Hawkman. Every incarnation they would make of Hawkman ever would always have to try and relate back to this and say, I got to do better than that. Like, I'm not joking. Whether he's going to use the guitar, whether he's going to use the Wolverine spikes. Actually, switch hands. He'd have the guitar on this hand. He'd hold it. He'd have the Wolverine claws on this hand. Yeah, he actually had Wolverine. Let that go. All the weapons he would use would always have to date back to this and say, is it cooler than the Cestus? Maybe? This was about as BA gets, all right? This was genuinely badass. So, anyway, Hawkman flying, trying to figure out what he's going to do next. He's trying to follow an energy trail. The guy, Merrick, is the guy who actually killed Hawkwoman. And it was quite by accident. He didn't mean it. It's like they had the information through the Absorbiscon where everybody was going to be. When they went there, Hawkwoman came out of a private quarters that she wasn't supposed to be in. They said she's going to be here. He's going towards there. All of a sudden, noise behind him. He turns around. It's Hawkwoman. He's like, ah! And blasts her. Oops. He kills her. They weren't supposed to kill her. Now it's going to be that much harder to get the anti-gravity technology. So their leader, and the leader part is actually kind of interesting here. The leader, you see, is Fel-Andar. Now that is especially interesting because Fel-Andar would actually become an incarnation of Hawkman at one point. Long story. I'm not getting into it. Okay, so Hawkman goes to his home to try and, take a better look at what's going on. He has a conversation with the birds. Like, listen, you guys are calmed down now? Okay, cool. Can we talk? Like, what's going on here? What's going on here? What are you guys doing? You know what I'm saying? What happened last night? It's like, this, that, and the other thing. So he takes one of his devices that's supposed to be able to follow energy. This was his plan all along. And he tracks the energy that had wound up hitting Mousy. And he follows that energy trail to a series of caves in this cliffside. Now, he's fairly familiar with the caves, but not that much. But he is familiar enough that he was able to sneak in, even though these guys were, for the most part, waiting for him. They expected him to do this, to track them back. But he flies in and he just starts, like the guards that were there waiting for him, he, handedly gets rid of them. It's like, bye. Mind you, eventually Hawkman would kill. All right? He would get to the point where he would kill. But here, he's not interested in killing. That's just, he hasn't, even the death of the murder of Hawkwoman is not enough to get him to want to kill. This was an older time of heroes. You know what I'm saying? So Hawkman just goes in and just starts pounding the crap out of everybody. Like Fel-Andar himself, he's just jacked up in a really messed up way. All of a sudden, some of the bad guys show up behind him. And he's like, oh, crap. Because he's focusing a lot of time. And this is where he's getting the information. This is where he finds out that these are actually the Thanagarians themselves. He's like, oh, dude, are you kidding me right now? It's actually my own people? Not cool, man. Not cool. So he's trying to get a history lesson of what's going on. And, yeah, it's bad. In the meantime, we also come to find out that this Merrick guy, the one who accidentally killed Hawkwoman, he's being punished. How is he being punished, you say? Well, I'm happy to tell you. He gets hooked up to the Absorbiscon. Yeah. You see, the reason why this is considered a low rent, I guess you'd say, Absorbiscon, it's not as good as the other one. It's as effective, but the problem is it doesn't have the screening, the mental shielding on it to protect the user. So the user is going to go through excruciating pain while being affected by this Absorbiscon. So, being affected. He's going to be affected by this pain coming in while he's using the Absorbiscon. Now, he gets permanently attached to the Absorbiscon. He's tied up there and hooked up to the diodes and everything. And he is now a part of this Absorbiscon, which means that he's going to be in excruciating pain forever, and he's not really going to be himself. Not really. Not truly. So, this is one of those fates worse than death kind of thing. And this is also basically Fel-Andar not understanding his own fallacies. And this is why he'd never be a good leader. But anyway, so these guys are about to jump on Hawkman. And a whole lot actually happens here. A whole lot happens. And mind you, I'm not giving you every single detail of this comic book. I want you to read the comic book. I want you to enjoy this comic book, dude. But while these guys are beating up on Hawkman, they actually get the jump on him. He's stronger than them, yes. He's got more, abilities than them, yes. He's trained better, oh, hell yes. but the numbers just want to, and plus he was focused on Fel Endar at this point. So he gets jumped and he's getting beaten practically to a pulp. It's okay. He heals like 3 times faster than anybody. Well, than your average human. So you'd figure about as fast as Captain America would. Let's look at it that way. When all of a sudden one of them gets blasted, a bunch of them get blasted. They turn around like, what's going on? It's Hawkwoman. What? Yeah, Hawkwoman shows up. She's got these Thanagarian guns, and she's like, I'm psyching up, man, and just like, bah, and starts jacking these guys up. She probably could have taken them all out right there, but she also wasn't trying to rush in the way. She knew that it's pretty much just her against all of them, and Hawkman fell that way, and if she winds up falling that way too, yeah, Huey, Dewey, Louie, no Boy Scouts manual, whatever that thing was, is going to get them out of this trouble. So she instead scares them off, flies down, grabs Hawkman, and then hightails it out of there. Tail feathers it out of there. Hawkman's appreciative. And he's like, oh my God, my love, I'm so glad you're still alive. What's going on? How that happened, none of your business. Go read the comic book how that happened. Because that's actually really cool. Like, this was incredible storytelling. How she actually survived what happened. Just saying. And there's also, my favorites back in the day, when comic books used to always have the whole narration boxes, the editor's notes that would say, to find out more about this that's being talked about, go back and see this issue. This is the thing that made me go and start reading other comic books and get hooked onto other comic book titles all the time, because they would say, go back and read this issue that happened a long time ago. So I would try and find that issue. Yay, it would support your local comic book store. And then maybe you'd just be like, you know what? This is a pretty cool comic book. Let's see the latest issue. I'm going to stay on this comic book. And now you're on 2 titles. And then you're on 30. That's the way it works, man. Those little editor's notes at the bottom, yeah, that's gateway drugs for comic books, for other titles. So, a whole bunch of crazy things happen, man. And you get to see, dude, these guys have got the best love story ever. I will put the Hawks against any love story you got. All right, not just in comic books. Bring it. So they decide that they've got to go and get some information from the Justice League, from the Hall of Justice. This is before the Watchtower was a really big thing. Hawkman is in charge of the Justice League at this point, and they've got to go in there and they've got to try and get this information. But mind you, this is important. They can't just go in there and say, hey, Hawkman, buddy, here's what's happening. Because all of a sudden, the Absorbiscon got your information. We got your info, brother. We found all your credit card information and everything, man. We're stealing your identity. They can potentially steal this stuff from these characters. Now, Aquaman is shown here to have full-fledged telepathy. A lot of writers won't show that. Whatever, I don't care. That's their problem. Aquaman has telepathy. Go and check out 10 Things About Aquaman on Comic Book University to understand how the blue or the clear is used. Aquaman has telepathy. And in this, he has telepathy also. So with a little bit more time, he could have figured out what's going on, but he also wasn't as practiced here. So he just has like a bit of a danger sense. But the thing is, the Hawks are amazing warriors. Okay, yes, better warriors than Aquaman. Aquaman could certainly beat up the Hawks because of how strong he is, how ridiculously strong he is. But when it comes to pure fighting power, having the training of, I'm a king of Atlantis and I got this cool, hand-to-hand combat training and whatnot, as opposed to, I got the drop on you and I am a premier fighter throughout history. Boom, gotcha. The Hawks are going to win. and realistically, Aquaman isn't that, he can probably lift 10 tons more than the Hawks. You know what I'm saying? So there's that. Anyway, so they've got to take out Aquaman really quick. The problem is, all of a sudden, Mr. Dibney shows up too. That's the elongated man. So they've got to figure out a way to get, and elongated man is no joke, dude. You can't, it's very hard to hurt this guy. He's not as tough as Plastic Man, but he's a tough SOB, and they got to go after him. Meanwhile, this is killing them. This is killing their morale, because, these are our friends, man. These are our friends. Well, by going there, and mind you, Aquaman didn't have time to really react and understand what was going on, but Elongated Man did. And that was enough for the Absorbiscon to work. And now all of a sudden, these guys, the Thanagarians, they knew where they were. It's like, oh, hey, what's up, bud? Are you looking for some information? Well, here's some information. We're on your ship. That's right. We hijacked your junk, man. We stole your ride, bro. Now, we ain't pimping it out. No, rather, we're going to crash it into the freaking Hall of Justice and kill you and everybody else in there. See you soon. Yeah. Wow. That's how part 3 ends. This title is crazy. This is crazy. So, next up, we see... we actually see a whole bunch of other plans that are being taken. See, these guys have multiple layers of plans, the Thanagarians, and they're sending agents over here, agents over there, all over the place to bribe people. They've got the secrets of high-ranking Pentagon officials, of business CEOs, so they could finance things. Like start sending some money our way, guys. Anybody who's got any kind of a dirty secret who is in a position of power, I know your stuff. Now, you need to start, taking care of me. Send me money, send me resources, send me information, let me into certain areas, give me equipment. They've got it down packed. This is such an expansive story. It's crazy. It's crazy. So, the Hawks have a plan, though. Mind you, their minds can't be read by the Absorbscon. So, and they also can't use their own Absorbscon, their better Absorbscon, to read their minds. So, they're on fairly even grounds here. The Hawks use a device in order to teleport onto the ship. And they kind of bounce around a little bit. It's pretty cool how they do this. And they go at it. Hawkman uses the new energy lance sort of thing, which is... That's awesome! And they start going after these Thanagarians. And they do a pretty fantastic job. They're able to take these guys out. And unfortunately, this is actually kind of a big deal. Remember when Hawkman destroyed some of his equipment that was down on Earth before? Might have regretted that, because now he's got to destroy a ship. The idea of comic books back in the day was you would have the villains wouldn't try to kill the heroes so much outright. They would never just take a gun and shoot them in the middle of, Fifth Avenue or something like that, which is what a psychopath would suggest doing. No, a true bad guy, a true villain, would instead put you in a death trap. So this would be some kind of a trap, some kind of a situation where impending doom, it's evident, you're going to die here, my friend. And then it's like, well, I'm too busy, or I don't care enough, I'm not going to give you any more attention. I'm going to leave and give you a chance to get out of this. Bye. And it made for exciting comic books. You know what I'm saying? That's how a lot of TV shows and serials, especially the serials, would end back in the day. So these guys... they actually set the ship up. So there were multiple different ways that the Hawks would wind up being killed in one way or another. And they were determined, these Thanagarians were determined to destroy the Hall of Justice. This was crucial to their plans. The only way out of it was for Hawkman and Hawkwoman to destroy their ship. Oh, man. I'm not doing it justice. It's not my job to do it justice. It's Tony Isabella's job to do it justice. And the artists. And they did. Read the comic book. That was intense. If you're a role player, if you're a gamer, and you like to play tabletop games, all right, like Dungeons & Dragons, or Marvel Superheroes, or any of the different pen and paper and dice role-playing games, the death trap here was perfect. It was, very few ways to get out of this. And... yeah. Later on, what happens is Fel Andar actually winds up surviving. Most of these guys didn't. All right, most of these guys didn't. And Fel Andar would wind up surviving, and he would go after Hawkman. But he gets disposed of in a most grotesque way, in a really messed up way. To find out more about that, you're going to have to read the comic book. But I'm gonna continue on a little bit, because the comic book is actually being wrapped up around this time. This changes Hawkman and Hawkwoman's status. This comic book was meant to change status a lot. All of their equipment is destroyed at this point, so the only thing that they have to use are Earth weapons, Earth tools. All of their stuff is gone at this point. They've had to destroy it all. There may be very few other things still left over that they could use. But for the most part, they're kind of screwed. It's almost like they're stranded at this point. And they know that they can't just fly back to Thanagar to try and handle the situation. They can't. They just don't have that ability. They can't ask their friends for help. Because, again, the Absorbiscon, all those plans, all that information would go straight to the bad guys. And the bad guys are still out there, mind you. So this is like Shadow War, man. This is crazy. And this was just the first battle. This was just the first wave. Now, in, I think, the same year or the next year, there would be a Hawkman special that came out. And this would introduce a whole bunch of new... This was actually supposed to resolve most of what happened with this particular battle, with the Shadow War miniseries. But a whole lot of new elements were introduced also, including... crying out loud. Somehow the Gentleman Ghost is involved in what's going on. That's a crazy book. And I love that issue also. And honestly, I couldn't recommend these 4 issues any more or less than I could recommend the Hawkman special. After that, there's, I think, 17 issues of Hawkman solo, Hawkman and Hawkwoman solo series. It's supposed to be an ongoing series. Only went to around issue 17 for a whole bunch of crazy reasons. But I can tell you this: the turnout for the Hawkman Shadow War of Hawkman miniseries was so incredible. They're like, okay, it looks like we're bringing Hawkman back in a regular monthly series again. It was that good. Fans went crazy over this. This was a turning point for Hawkman. And I don't like to take sides in anything, and I only know very little of the story. I've never talked privately with any of the parties involved, and I really wish that I could. I really wish I can get some of that insider information to understand what exactly happened, but I do know that this was supposed to be a 10-year long story. 10 years. Maybe it was 5, but I think it was 10. Either way, this was supposed to be a really long story. This was supposed to go on for a while, and it was supposed to be multiple crossovers and all sorts of crazy instances that were supposed to happen in regards to this. You know what? I should have probably prepared a little bit better, but I have a list somewhere. I have a list right... not there. Here. Telling me that the Shadow War of Hawkman was supposed to be, or what wound up becoming... Shadow War, Hawkman, issues 1 through 4. That's what we just read here. The Hawkman special, which I'm telling you about, which, yes, only happened a couple of months later in 1985, the very butt end of 1985. Then in DC Comics Presents, oh yes, DC Comics Presents issue number 95, which was released about a year later, the next year, April of the next year. That was a very interesting story because that sheds a whole lot of new light. I'm remembering that now. That should have probably prepared for this a little bit better, right? I'm remembering that now. That shed a whole lot more light on the story and opened up multiple paths. This is like, playing a role-playing game where now you've got, this is not linear. This is not, okay, the next event you've got to go to is this. Nuh-uh. You're opened up. What's your choice? Pick your poison. Where do you want to go to battle, to fight the next battle, to try and win the ultimate war? After that, we had Hawkman, Volume 2, issue number 1 through 10, and issue number 11 and 12. And it didn't go all the way. After that, the remaining 5 issues or whatever was just a regular story. It wound up winding down and became nothing, pretty much. And also Action Comics issue number 588. I wound up doing the, what was it? The Big Barda and Superman supposed porn tape that John Byrne had wrote. I wound up doing a spotlight and story of that some time ago. And just a couple of issues before that, 8 issues or so before that, was this one, the Action Comics number 588. And this was in 1987. And what this basically did was this was supposed to wrap up the story. So the final wrap up was in issue number 11 and 12 of Hawkman. And the story just kind of ended there. And that's a shame, because again, we're supposed to get 5 or 10 more years of this super secret Shadow War that only Hawkman and Hawkwoman could have possibly known about. Nobody else could have really known more about this. But again, what little I know about this is Tony Isabella, him talking on Facebook, him mentioning something that actually stoked my interest a lot. I put out something on Twitter, and he commented on it, and I was honored. But it was mostly just him saying, I would love to tell everybody exactly what I feel about the editors of DC at the time for completely screwing over this amazing story that I had. And although I don't like to take sides, I hate to take sides, especially when I only know one side of the story, or even a portion of one side of the story, and I don't know the other side of the story. I will say this. The Shadow War of Hawkman had the potential to be one of the greatest stories ever written in comic books. This is not just my love for Tony Isabella's work. Tony Isabella, the creator of a lot of characters, actually, but also the creator of Black Lightning. That's kind of a big deal. And don't forget to check out Black Lightning Explained in a Minute on Comic Book University. This is actually one of my first Explained in a Minutes before I started doing 10 Things About. So a particular favorite of mine. Go back and check that out. But I'm telling you, this should have been one of the greatest comic book stories ever. Everything was there. If you ever wanted to run like a Dungeons & Dragons mission or something like that, consider a story like this. Obviously, things would have to be changed, but wow, this is an absurdly amazing story. No story has the right to be this good. And the way that it did it wasn't necessarily bad, but it was dissatisfying, because you could see the potential that was there for this amazing story. And it does feel like a ball was dropped. What a shame. I'm going to call it coitus interruptus. And I'm going to leave it there. Nonetheless, guys, Shadow War of Hawkman, and also at the very least, Hawkman Special. You can grab those guys. I've got links below in the description so that you can purchase them, physical copies, or what have you, digital copies. Just totally worth it. I could not recommend a story more than I can recommend stories equal. Hard for me to recommend a story better than this. And yes, a lot of that does have to do with nostalgia, but this could be nostalgic for you also. We create our own nostalgia. Guys, that's going to be it for me. Professor Bill, Comic Book University. Class dismissed.